From the moment Bronny James entered the NBA, the hate was relentless. Critics called him overrated, undeserving, and a product of pure nepotism. They claimed he was only in the league because of his last name, not his talent. Some even went as far as to say he was the worst draft pick in years. A player who had no business stepping onto an NBA court. And it wasn't just the fans. NBA insiders, analysts, and even former players openly questioned his place in the league. ESPN's Stephen A. Smith took things even further, publicly pleading with LeBron James to stop this, insisting that everyone knew Bronny was only in the NBA because of his father. The controversy became so intense that LeBron himself stepped in, personally confronting Smith at a Lakers game. But while the world focused on the drama, Bronny was quietly putting in the work. Behind the scenes he was grinding, improving, and proving that he wasn't just a legacy pick. And as the season went on, something shocking happened. The same people who once laughed at the idea of Bronny in the NBA started changing their tune. So, was Bronny truly a nepotism pick who never belonged? Or was he set up to fail from the start? What happened next shocked everyone, and it just might change the way people look at LeBron James Jr. forever. From the moment Bronny James declared for the NBA draft, the backlash was immediate. His name alone made him one of the most talked about prospects in years. Not because of his skills, but because of who his father was. The moment the Los Angeles Lakers...
I am pleading with LeBron James as a father. Stop this.
...selected him, the internet exploded. The accusations came fast. Nepotism, favoritism, privilege. Critics argued that Bronny had only made it this far because of his last name, not his talent. Even before he played a single game, the hate was relentless. Social media was flooded with posts mocking the Lakers for wasting a draft pick. NBA analysts questioned whether he even deserved a roster spot. And then came the loudest voice of them all, Stephen A. Smith, one of the most influential sports commentators in the game. On live television he didn't hold back. He pleaded with LeBron James to stop forcing this, saying, "We all know Bronny is in the NBA because of his dad." It was a statement that echoed across the sports world. People who already doubted Bronny took this as confirmation. He didn't belong. But LeBron wasn't going to let that slide. In a moment that shocked even the most seasoned NBA reporters, LeBron James personally confronted Stephen A. Smith at a Lakers game, calling him out for what he saw as an unfair attack on his son. The two men had known each other for years, but this moment changed everything. Smith later admitted that his criticism of Bronny had ruined his friendship with LeBron. While the world focused on the drama, Bronny had a choice to make. He could let the negativity define him, or he could prove everyone wrong. He chose the second option. Behind the scenes he was putting in the work. His training sessions became more intense. His focus sharpened. He knew that every mistake would be magnified, every bad game would be used as proof that he was a bust. At first the doubters seemed to be right. His first few NBA appearances were underwhelming. He struggled with the speed of the game. He looked hesitant. The headlines were brutal. "Bronny is not an NBA player," one sports show declared. Fans laughed, calling him the worst draft pick in years. Some even questioned whether the Lakers would send him to the G League permanently. But then something changed. Slowly, quietly, Bronny started to improve. It wasn't flashy at first, but basketball insiders began noticing his defense was solid, his passing was improving, and his confidence was growing. In the G League he wasn't just surviving, he was starting to stand out. The same people who once said he didn't belong were now hesitating before making those claims again. NBA scouts who had written him off started changing their tone. Coaches praised his work ethic. Even former players who initially dismissed him started paying attention. The media, always quick to tear down athletes, suddenly found themselves having to acknowledge the truth. Bronny James was proving people wrong. And it wasn't just insiders noticing. Fans who had once mocked him began to respect his grind. His highlights started circulating on social media. Not because of his name, but because of actual basketball plays. A perfectly timed steal. A clutch three-pointer. A defensive stop that changed momentum. It was happening. Bronny wasn't just LeBron's son anymore. He was earning his place. But despite this, the doubters weren't ready to give up. Some still insisted that he was only getting opportunities because of his father. They claimed his minutes were gifted, not earned. But those arguments became harder to make when he started delivering in key moments. Game after game he continued to improve. And then the ultimate irony, Stephen A. Smith himself began to change his opinion. The same man who had publicly trashed Bronny, saying he shouldn't be in the NBA, was now acknowledging that the kid was proving him wrong. It was a full circle moment. But this wasn't just about Bronny versus the media. This was about something much bigger. This was about how sports culture treats young athletes, especially those with famous parents. From day one, Bronny had been set up to fail. If he struggled, people would say, "See? He's not good enough." If he succeeded, they'd say, "Of course, his dad made sure of it." No matter what he did, there was always going to be criticism. Yet through all of that, he kept pushing. He didn't let the hate define him. He didn't let the doubters get into his head. And now, the same people who once laughed at the idea of him being in the NBA are starting to take him seriously. But here's the real question. Is this just the beginning? Bronny is already proving people wrong now. What happens next? Will he continue to develop into a true NBA star? Or will the pressure catch up to him? Will he always be in his father's shadow? Or will he carve his own legacy? One thing is clear. Bronny James is not the same player he was when he first entered the league. The world wanted him to fail. Instead, he's showing that he's willing to fight for his place. So now the narrative has flipped. Is Bronny proving his doubters wrong, or were people just too quick to judge him in the first place? Has he really earned his spot in the league, or will he always have to deal with people questioning his success? One thing is for sure. This story isn't over. The story of Bronny James in the NBA is far from over, but one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The narrative around him is shifting. What started as a tale of nepotism, criticism, and doubt is slowly evolving into one of growth, perseverance, and redemption. The people who once laughed at his selection, mocked his performances, and dismissed him as nothing more than LeBron's son, are now watching closely, waiting to see what happens next. But the question remains, was the hate ever truly justified? Or was Bronny set up to fail from the very beginning? From the moment he declared for the NBA draft, the expectations placed on Bronny James were impossible. He wasn't just any young prospect, he was the son of one of the greatest players to ever live. That meant every move, every shot, every mistake would be analyzed under a microscope. If he succeeded, people would say it was only because of his father. If he failed, they would say he never deserved to be there in the first place. It was a no-win situation. And at first it looked like the critics were right. His early performances were shaky. He looked hesitant. The speed of the game seemed to overwhelm him. The internet was ruthless. Memes, jokes, and harsh criticism flooded social media, with fans and analysts alike dismissing him as a bust before he even had a chance to prove himself. Then came Stephen A. Smith's infamous rant, the moment that truly ignited the firestorm. When one of the most well-known voices in sports media publicly called out LeBron James, telling him to stop forcing this, it felt like the final nail in the coffin for Bronny. If someone as respected as Stephen A. was saying it, then surely it had to be true, right? But that's what made what happened next so shocking. Bronny James didn't fold. He didn't lash out. He didn't fire back at the critics. He just worked. Behind the scenes, while the world was calling him a failure, he was grinding. And slowly something changed. At first, it was small things. His defense started improving. His decision-making got sharper. His confidence grew. The same people who once dismissed him began noticing the little details. The way he moved without the ball, the effort he put in on defense, the glimpses of high IQ plays that showed he wasn't just riding his father's coattails. Then the stat sheet started telling a different story. His shooting percentages climbed. His turnovers dropped. His minutes increased. Coaches started trusting him in bigger moments. The G League games that were once seen as just a formality for a player who didn't belong suddenly became evidence that he was figuring it out. And then came the biggest shift of all. The media started changing their tune. The same analysts who once laughed at the idea of Bronny in the NBA were now forced to acknowledge that he was actually improving. The same fans who once mocked him for being in his father's shadow were now admitting that he was working hard to earn his place. Even Stephen A. Smith, the man who practically led the charge against Bronny, started to walk back his words. He admitted that Bronny was working, that he was improving, that maybe, just maybe, people had judged him too soon. And that's the thing about sports. Narratives can change in an instant. One day an athlete is being called a failure. The next they're proving everyone wrong. And that's exactly what Bronny James is doing. But here's the bigger question. How far can this go? Bronny has already silenced some of his biggest doubters, but the road ahead is still long. Can he ever escape his father's shadow? Can he carve out a legacy of his own? Or will he always be viewed as LeBron James' son first, and an NBA player second? And what about the people who still refuse to believe in him? Because even with all the progress he's made, there will always be those who argue that he only has a roster spot because of his father. But maybe that doesn't matter anymore. Maybe the hate, the doubt, the constant comparisons, maybe none of it matters. Because at the end of the day, Bronny is still standing. He's still improving. He's still proving that he's willing to fight for his place. And that's the part that his doubters never saw coming. They expected him to fold under pressure. They expected him to be a joke. They didn't expect him to rise above it. So now we're left with a new narrative. It's no longer just about whether Bronny James deserved to be drafted. Now it's about what happens next. If he continues improving, continues working, continues proving people wrong, how long before people stop questioning him? How long before they finally admit that he belongs? And if that moment ever comes, will the same people who doubted him be willing to admit they were wrong? One thing is certain, this conversation isn't over. If Bronny James has already started proving people wrong this early in his career, imagine what the next few years could bring. Maybe, just maybe, this was never about living up to his father's name. Maybe it was about building his own.